The scientific community is in consensus. Climate change is real and it is our responsibility to do something about it. This documentary will focus on the impact of climate change in Russia. As one of the northernmost countries of the world, the Russian Federation is one of the most susceptible to increases in average temperature. Russia is the largest country in the world, expanding across 2 continents. It encompasses many ecosystems and numerous different demographics. Russia's actions throughout history have aided in the onset of anthropogenic climate change. However, Russia's future actions with the UNFCCC can aid in the reversal of anthropogenic climate change across the globe. As climate change worsens and temperatures rise, Russia is facing many opportunities and vulnerabilities. Opportunities depict the positive impacts in Russia's society caused by climate change, including the dimensions of the ecological change, the exposed both the environment and the people, and the sensitivity, so that is social, political, economic, and other impacts in Russian society. These vulnerabilities are negative impacts in Russia's society that are caused by climate change, including the dimensions of the hazard itself, the exposed, again, the environments and the peoples, and the sensitivity, so again, the social, political, economic, and other impacts in Russian society. To begin with, we look at the different opportunities arising from a warming global climate. Due to warmer temperatures, permafrost melting has led to agricultural expansion. Permafrost is the soil, rock, or sediment that is frozen for more than 2 consecutive years and currently covers over 60% of Russia. The ecological change is the permafrost melting due to an increase in average temperatures. Land previously covered by permafrost, as well as the populations that live by or near permafrost, are exposed. The sensitivity is the benefit to the economy for increased agricultural production. In Russian society can also be a new and or improved form of living for people around the area. It is also a place for the government to develop a new sector of business. Another opportunity is the ecological change of melting ice because of warmer weather, which has increased water flow, which has further increased Russia's use of hydroelectricity, clean energy. An increased use of clean energy can mean cleaner air for the people living by factories that burn copious amounts of CO2 emissions. It can mean jobs for the construction and sustainment of equipment, and it can be a political benefit in a global collaboration developing cleaner energies. As well as permafrost melting ecological change, Arctic ice that borders Russia has also been melting. The exposed are those that live by borders previously covered in ice, while the sensitivity is resulting in the opportunity for more trade to occur in the north at a cheaper rate due to the easier travels. For example, there is less need for icebreakers to lead ships across the water. The melting ice also enables the cheaper extraction of resources in northern Russia, granting access to resources previously blocked by the ice. As positive as these opportunities may seem for Russia, there are still severe vulnerabilities affecting its citizens. The vulnerability of the permafrost melting is that a carbon source is created. The frozen permafrost traps greenhouse gas emissions, is a hazard, destroying the carbon sink that covers over 60% of Russia. Carbon sinks are a reservoir that traps carbon-containing chemicals. With the permafrost melting, the carbon is being released from the ice and turning into a carbon source. Carbon sources are sources of carbon being released into the atmosphere instead of being trapped into the atmosphere like in a carbon sink. It will speed up the greenhouse effect, worsening negative impacts of climate change. All of Russia is exposed, as well as its ecosystems. The sensitivity can result in a complicated policy fixes. Because it is an accident of geography, Russia can't be held responsible for the copious amounts of emissions that were stored in the permafrost being released by the warming temperatures that the entire globe has participated in. Another vulnerability and hazard is that the permafrost melts, it does so unevenly. The global warming melting is causing the infrastructure of the permafrost to be compromised, exposing the ecosystems and people living on or near the permafrost to be vulnerable. Its sensitivity includes the political and social response to protecting buildings from collapsing and taking care of sinkholes that are appearing. These all cause exposure to various portions of Russians' society, as well as affecting the social, political, and economic impacts of climate change in Russia.
Hi everyone, I want to talk about the Russia carbon footprint. And first of all, I want to talk about the economy between the Industrial Revolution. Russia is one of the latest countries that started the Industrial Revolution. Before the Industrial Revolution, Russia is one of the biggest agricultural country. Russia is transferred to the industrial country after the revolution. The Trans-Siberian Railway, a vast railroad project carried out by the Russian government in order to bolster a most efficient process of the Russia democratic trade by the military, was constructed from 1891 to 1916. Because of the planning of using the iron and other materials starting polluting the environment of Russia, even it is essential for Russian people. And also I want to talk about the imperialism of the Russia during 18th century. Russia has already colonized and matured at the end of 18th centuries, which is the time Russia did the Industrial Revolution. At that time, Russian military contingents joined the forces from Europe, Japan, and the United States to restore order to northern China so that they can gain the plenty of the resource in China, as well as they can also force China to trade with them in some ways. Also, I want to talk about the history of fossil fuel burning in Russia. From the Wikipedia, we can know many development countries found a new resource like oil and coal generating electricity after Second Industrial Revolution. There are great stores of oil and gas in Russia. This is basic power to help this country become wealthier and more powerful. In 2012, Russia was the second largest producer of dry natural gas and the third largest liquid fuel producer in the world. In Russia, most fossil fuel burning happen not only in factory and driving, but also for people use electricity and heating in the winter because of the cold weather and snow disasters. Also, we find a table that shows the Russia current emissions in relation to other countries. From the table, we can see Russia is the largest total emission in Philippines increase, but the metric ton per capita decrease. But both of Norway and Canada decrease in total emissions and the metric tons per capita. Also, I want to talk about the deforestation. Because of the generally high degree of land suitability of crops and the late Industrial Revolution, Russia was not subject of significant deforestation until the late 19th and early 20th century. Russia first employed the conservation laws in 1888 and had new laws put into place in 1980 and 1918 and 1923 under the USSR. Many of these laws angered the president and caused by the deforestation. For this season, many studies brush over the pre-1950s history because of the inadequate data collections. Data was the most available for protected area. The State Forest Account was established in 1958 and set up a procedure for collection data on the status and the spread of the forest, which by rule would be collected every 5 years. Data collected by SFA shows that from 1961 to 1998, the forest area in Russia increased from 695 to 774 million hectares, and in 2010 had a forest area of 809 million hectares. Russia has been challenged by extreme wildfire damaged forests since 1990s, and it's also harmed by illegal logging in the Far East portions. Also, the trade-off is one of the most important things in Russia. One trade-off that Russia faced by agreeing to follow European emission standard of vehicles and transport fuel, they will reduce the emissions from vehicles in Russia, but there will be a financial cost to switch and phase out the unqualified fuel and vehicles. A study shows that within the melting and the permafrost in Russia, there could be 1 million kilometers square increase than arable land. And the Russia River flow arrange rise the average temperature make it easier to collect clean energy from hydroelectricity. However, increase in river flow can increase the temperature of the body of water, which create convective storm that cause floods of floats.
The UNFCCC is an international environmental treaty. The objective is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere at a level that could prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with the climate system. The Kyoto Protocol is also an international treaty, which extends the 1992 UNFCCC that commits state parties to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Based on the premise that global warming exists and the man-made carbon dioxide emissions have caused it, Russia signed into the UNFCCC on June 13, 1992, was accepted on December 28, 1994, and its entry into force occurs March 28, 1995. When Kyoto Protocol first started, Russia delayed reflection until they used it as the point of leverage. Their main involvement in climate change has been fueled by economic and political leverage and as a way to improve their own economy, not to necessarily fix climate change. The current attitude in Russia regarding climate change is it is not a priority. The main concern is to continue to develop and improve their economy after their economic crash in the 1990s. Russia is ranked as the 81st country in vulnerability to climate change. In Russia, only 58% of Russians think their country has a responsibility to work to stop climate change. In 2010, only 22% of Russians believed that most of scientists consider climate change an urgent problem. Russia actually submitted their climate action plan ahead of schedule for the 2015 Paris Agreement. According to the Climate Collab, Russia's seventh climate change platform includes the following parts, like strengthen and develop scientific basis for climate policy, long-term predictions, awareness of climate change in general, develop and implement short and long-term adaptation measures. There are four main reasons for Russia to stop UNFCCC by changing their climate action plan, such as promotion of an international climate negotiation mechanism, gain the lost balance of climate change, government position, and economic transformation. At the moment, President Putin thinks that global warming is being used as an economic weapon against Russia. It will affect Russia's political platform on climate change to become indifferent. However, in September, Putin's top advisor on global warming dismissed the criticism of Russia by Climate Action Tracker, a group of climate research groups linked to the United Nations and the World Wildlife Fund. The group said Russia has a worse record of carbon emissions than China, the United States, and the European Union. Also, because the climate change affects people's daily life, especially affects vulnerable populations like indigenous people and women. In Russia, women are devalued in society. They are seen as incapable as the same tasks as men, and there have been recent trends towards devaluing women's work, which have been demoralizing and financially devastating for women. Due to the unfair Russian society, women face prejudice that limits their opportunity for individual economic success, making them dependent upon their male counterparts. The GDP of Russia has been affected by climate change. It will make women face worse employment situation. Indigenous people have limited resources. They are also fighting to protect the environment and the rivers, but are being blocked by the majority making a profit of harmful of production. The land they live on is losing its foundation because of the permafrost melting unevenly because of warming temperatures.
The first recommendation from the IRCC to the Russian Federation is that it should participate in post-Kyoto UNFCCC negotiations. The Russian government cannot afford to let climate continue to increase. Structural damage from permafrost melting and flooding would cost the Russian public millions. As part of the UNFCCC negotiations, the Russian Federation should cut back their national greenhouse gas emissions, as expected of them as an Annex I country. To counteract the economic downfall of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, the Russian Federation should push for emission credits based off of forest conservation and joint implementation programs. This is beneficial to the Russian Federation because it contains 1/5 of the world's forests and shares the title for most joint implementation programs. The Russian Federation should maintain their forest conservation programs and strengthen them when able by setting up federally protected forests. The IRCC recommends the development of flood protection along coastal regions and major rivers to help mitigate the damage caused by climate-induced storms and flooding. In Russia, over 50% of the public do not believe that climate change is a severe problem. For this reason, the IRCC recommends that the Russian Federation deploy educational programs on climate change created by a federally endorsed Natural Resources Institute. The cost of lowering greenhouse gas emissions and thus curbing climate change would be the loss of increased water flow for hydroelectricity, the loss of warmer winters providing less energy needed, and the loss of shipping routes in the northern waters of Russia that are much faster than the current ones. The benefits of lowering greenhouse gas emissions include protection of infrastructure built on permafrost, reduced flooding, reduced wildfires, and reduced desertification of the Russian taiga. While it does seem that there are some costs that could be economically beneficial, it still does not outweigh the benefits of avoiding natural disasters. Even though the increased water flow would allow for more energy to be produced through hydroelectricity, it wouldn't offset the damage caused by the increased water flow when it becomes flooding. Nor can any of the costs outweigh the benefits of avoiding widespread wildfires that have plagued Russia in the past decade. Another reason for Russia to adapt now is because Russia's major export is oil, and when other countries stop needing the oil, it will be difficult for Russia to maintain itself from the natural disasters after losing such a large source of their income. The IRCC's recommendations are justified because for future economic growth, it is necessary to cut back national emissions within market sustainability. Low-carbon economy is a future tendency. Russia has realized the importance of energy conservation for its own economic security and international competitiveness. Some data shows that if the economic system cannot adapt to the effect of climate change, the gross domestic product of Russia will be reduced by 2% to 5% every year. The economy is directly related to the people's livelihoods, so sustainable development should be very significant to the Russian government. As indicated previously, Russia's vulnerable populations include indigenous groups, women, Siberians, and the poor. Our recommendation for Russia to start to take action to reduce emissions and work with the UNFCCC to stop the effects of climate change are the first step in helping these vulnerable groups. If Russia were to not lower emissions and let the climate continue to warm, it would harm the vulnerable populations the most. By taking this important step of acknowledging the problem and making policies to correct it is going to help Russia's vulnerable population stop suffering from the negative effects of climate change. There are over 40 different indigenous groups in Russia, many of which live in the northern territories and follow traditional nomadic lifestyles. These lifestyles are highly affected by changes in the ecosystem and can result in hardships for the indigenous people. The poor of Russia are negatively affected by climate change because when natural disasters such as flooding and wildfires cause damage, the people are unable to pay to fix their homes. While Siberians are vulnerable to climate change because most of Siberia is covered in permafrost that is historically frozen year-round. With increases in global temperature, the permafrost is allowed to thaw more and more every year. The thawing allows for the ground to sink, and any structures built upon this ground are inherently damaged by the shifting in the ground.